Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and today, obscured and dark YouTuber. Look at this thing on my face right now. I guess it lit up once I put my hand there, but in this traditional standard sense, it looks pretty dark. And today we're going to get back into the nice sense of darkness that we know and love. Swans, band I've been covering for a bit now, haven't covered for about a month, but I thought after finishing a little half series, might as well get back into the swing of things just because I felt like it. I love Swans. Their history is just too cool. And today we're covering some interesting stuff. On our first episode, we covered the first two albums as well as the first two EPs, very core industrial era. And on the second part, we covered a similar stage, Greed and Holy Money, and the beginnings of Jarbo's inclusion of the band, the female vocalist that would come to be in the band up until they finally disbanded in the late 90s, early 2000s, give or take. I don't really know. It's just kind of, well, I think they stopped recording things going into the 2000s once they made soundtracks for the blind, but we're a long ways away from that. Right now, we're talking about the transitioning out of the industrial period. They made public castration as a great idea, and now we're going right into the next era. The one that would get them kind of some commercial success, in all honesty, in a really weird way, and that is with their seminal breakthrough album, not just in terms of an underground New York scene, but an album that appeals to people outside of this tiny little disgusting genre of this harsh, no-wave industrial blend that is alienating to a lot of people. And in all honesty, we get just as uncomfortable with a real landmark. Of course, I am referring to 1987's Children of God, the longest album in Swans' catalog thus far. In terms of studio albums, Public Castration is a good idea, is a really long one, but this one is over an hour as well, and we get a really conceptual one here, and also one that breaks the mold. Some stuff we were starting to see on A Screw and Holy Money and Greed. We were starting to get a little bit more instrumentation with the usage of piano and a bit more of a dusty, ethereal effect. And then in Public Castration showed how in a live setting it could just be so loud that the reverb could be used as a audible weapon. But we're covering a bit more of a cerebral one today, one with actual singing in it, and with a lot of highlights that you'll see extending into Swan's career very deeply. Of course, we've seen a few songs that have extended super deeply, such as I Crawled off of the Young God EP, a personal favorite song of mine, as well as every song off that EP. That EP is a masterpiece, but we're covering a really weird one today. And without further ado, let's start discussing our first album of the day with the track New Mind. It is gothic forward, bizarre, and really cool sounding. It's a total switch up just from the get-go, but it still has that sort of lurching, sort of industrial sense of repetition going for it. This song is really notable for its lyrical density. There are so many words on the song compared to the more repetitive and almost improvisational style of the first four albums. It almost has a monolithic sense to it with just its sheer one-to-one contrast as opposed to having its brick wall of sound that the previous Swans albums were known for. And instantly you're given themes of religion that have such a creepy vibe to them that the tone of the album is set immediately. We did see some sort of inkling of this on the past couple of albums, but this album is called Children of God, so you can fill in the blanks and see if that's the theme of this album or not. And Jarbo has a really cool addition of some really ghostly backing vocals, which give this such a larger and creepy vibe to the whole thing. It's a really haunting track and a really interesting way to start the album, already a serious highlight. And up next is the track In My Garden. And unlike any previous Swans song, this one is soft. It's also gothic and dark and very imposing. Even though we had that early track off of Greed that had all that piano on it, this is a huge contrast with everything Swans has done so far. And even though it's pretty one note, it's not too long, it's almost an interlude feeling of a song, but it feels so different. Not to mention just the themes of the track are daunting. I'm happy to say Jarbo finally has her own solo sung song here, and her monotonous and mournful tone almost makes me want to cry. It seems to be referencing the Garden of Eden, but it has such an unsettling perspective on the whole thing, and the large set of keys dominating the sound of the whole track here is really mesmerizing. It's a way of Swans knowing how to truly manipulate texture that they've always been quite good at. You know, even on their earliest stuff, the bass guitar never sounded like a bass guitar, and then they went and made no instrument sound like any other instrument, and that will be something they do for the entire rest of their career. And this is followed by the song Our Love Lies. And Jarbo's soft and ethereal voice contrasts deeply with Michael Gira's deep, brash, and harsh vocals. Even though he's singing melodically here, it's a serious contrast, and it shows a real strength to the themes that you'll see on every track for the next several albums. You know, that contrast is awesome. It's in this lumbering 3/4 time, and it has this awesome set of existential lyrics contrasting the inability to believe in a higher power with a necessity to believe in a higher power. Something that'll dominate a lot of Swans' future material is a sense of total apocalyptic doom. And the guitar has this blanket effect of all the reverb that sounds so awesome. It's really cool. And up next is a serious highlight for future live events and everything with Swans. This is a track that shows up on multiple live albums, even through the 2010s, Sex, God, Sex, which has this awesome 2-chord structure that lumbers and dominates the whole thing. And it really comes to life on the live albums that I'll be mentioning later. It sounds just immense and slightly groovy, but not groovy enough to be danceable, just groovy enough to keep you sort of rolling along with it. The chords are also switched between these huge monolithic slides. This lumbers on for 7 minutes in length, which is currently unheard of for a Swans studio track. Of course, if you know anything about their later material, that will be a part of the course, but back then it truly was something different. It's about denying your innate desires as a human being. It's about like killing the lizard brain in a weird way. And it's so cool because Michael Gira actually has a rather strong vocal performance here. It's one of his most emotional, despite him not yelling or tearing his throat out or sounding guttural at all. He's singing almost as nicely as he can. It's not that nice. It's still very post-punk, very edgy, goth, but it's certainly nicer. And it courses along like a dirge, but almost a dirge that you're enthralled with. It's really bizarre. And this goes into the song Blood and Honey, which has such hazy, exotic instrumentation. It's got a really mesmerizing feeling to the whole thing. And it's another example of a Swans track being just a haze, something that you can't even focus on because it's so alien. As the instrumental is filled with these giant sets of droning, you have Jarbo singing purely about the state of death on top of it. It's creepy, but then it turns into a spoken word section, which slowly just cranks up the unsettling factor into something hard to sit through. Another album and career highlight, the next track, Like a Drug, Sha-La-La, which is one that would also be brought on future live albums and is always a hit, even on their less good live albums. This is almost a callback to something that you'd see on Greed or Holy Money. The way it is lumbering and so thick and heavy. The old bass texture is back just for a tiny moment. The chorus just feels like drugs, in all honesty. It's got the like a drug sort of yelled refrain, and then he's singing that sha-la-la with Jarbo in the back, and it's just so unsettling and weird. It's like bugs in your skin. You've got this fanfare in the background, almost a 1970s Miles Davis era style trumpet going off, just screeching away in the background. It sounds so bizarre. It's as pounding and abrasive as this album ever gets, but it's one that is such a weird song. For once, we have some more cryptic Swans lyrics as opposed to the earlier ones, which are very clearly about one thing or another, or portraying someone as a victim in some scenario. And this one is like a more blanket generalization in a way that is more philosophical, a bit more broad, a bit more expansive even. And this goes into the track You're Not Real Girl, which this is a really interesting track because the guitar work here is much more folky and actually rather beautiful compared to the rest of the album. It's cool because it's about a lack of connection between human beings. And I love this song because it has a really sharp contrast with the religious themes on the rest of the album, where it sort of denies an idea of objectivity, almost like your eyes are denying themselves in a really interesting way. I think it's such a cool sort of tag to the themes of the album. It's a way that just enhances the rest of it. It's like, even though you can't trust an idea of a higher power, you can't really trust yourself either, which is... at least it's not like Reddit fedora wearing bait of religion. At least it has some semblance of substance here. You get some gunshot sounds before it's led into this tribal drum pattern that is super eerie, as well as one of the most cacophonous mixes on the album. It is a pounding waltz, just as heavy as the material off of Cop, featuring one of my favorite lyrics of Swans from this era, "This is my only regret, that I ever was born." Super heavy stuff, and this is actually paralleling the story of Abraham and Isaac, except the difference is in this song, it is sort of a delusional Abraham who offers up his son Isaac to nothing. He's just wants to sacrifice him, which is really interesting and really unsettling. The idea of children being victims is something that you'll see on every single Swans album, until the end of Swans albums, as far as I can tell. It seems to keep showing up, but here it's in a really cool, religiously monolithic way. This goes into the song Blackmail, which has shown up previously on the Screw EP, which is tagged on the end of Holy Money for some people, and it's certainly a weird one for both. It's definitely pretty alien for that era of Swans, and showing up here makes a lot more sense. It's Jarbo singing over piano and sounding like she's comforting a child from just the previous track off of Beautiful Child, which is a really interesting way to fit it into the album. It's not one-dimensional, though. It's either religious or doting in a romantic sense, which has a really interesting contrast, as well as a sweet yet tragic theme to the whole thing. I find this to be quite an effective song for how short it is. And this goes into the track Trust Me. It has a similar but tense instrumental right from the start. And it does something Swans starts to do on this album where it can get really, really loud and yet rather beautiful. The texture is just unfathomably nice. It's got an unsettling sort of stream of consciousness style of lyrical delivery here, where it has the lyrics, "You can trust me now" and "You cannot trust me now" on the same song. The contrast is direct and maybe a little bit unsubtle, but at the same time, it shows an interesting conflict. The song feels like it is groaning and in pain. The bass tone is just full of just so much bloat and just disgust. It almost feels like the song itself is being crucified. And next is the song Real Love. This is a soft and folky cut that is thematically very heavy, which overall just makes you feel defeated at this point in the album, where you have such strong and intense and burning emotions. Leaving with something so soft after is just something that really makes you feel just destroyed. With how much irony goes into this track, it makes the listener feel incredibly cold. And in sharp contrast, we go into the track Blind Love. It's groovy, intense, and foreboding until it gets loud and brash. It is a song that just falls over itself as Michael Gira starts groaning in pain until it all winds down to this more of a whisper. It's such an interesting sort of drop down until we reach the closer of the album, Children of God. Paired with the dusty production this album is mostly known for, and as well as every other album Swans did up until Soundtracks for the Blind, you get something here that sounds honestly glorious, like it was dusted off from all these ashes just now. You have chopped up Jarbo vocals and organ samples that are just screwed up in this way that is so bizarre. It's like this twisted sort of idol, but it is so gorgeous. The lyrics are simple, just being repetitive the whole time, but it's got such a huge sense of victory over itself. The way it pounds away and just tumbles on itself, and it's so glorious sounding. It's an interesting way to end the album, an amazing way to end the album. And I gotta say, this album is so cool. It feels like Dead Can Dance, but evil. I do wish the themes were fleshed out just a little bit more. I feel like some of the songs could have reached a greater, louder peak. It's almost like it got compressed a bit too much. And I think Swans at this era definitely could have used a little less compression. I think conceptually this is pretty sound, thematically very interesting. Great way to have Jarbo start the discography. At least in a way of her actually being here. I give it a Come to Brazil. I think it's a very solid addition to the discography. It's one of the better Swans albums for sure. Not amongst my favorites. I guess some people might say I think it's a little overrated, I guess, a little bit. Some people probably think it's a little better than this, but it is a really cool one. And next I'm going to briefly discuss a live album called Feel Good Now. If you like Public Castration is a good idea, but you want it with the Children of God material, that's basically what you're getting here. And it's one that has a bit more contrast because you hear a bit more instrumentals. It has that same low fidelity that Public Castration is known for, but it's in a totally new light. Instead of the only contrast being maximum volume and silence, you have a bit more width and breadth here. You know, you go into some more softer instrumentals at points, but for the most part, this thing is super heavy, especially on Like a Drug. It gets as heavy as possible. I think this is a fantastic live album. It is amongst the best. Before the modern incarnation of Swans, this is like easily top 3 of this old era. It's like behind Public Castration probably, but it's such a cool one. Especially the interpretation of Like a Drug, one of the best things they ever did. And very briefly, I'll be discussing a single Swans released right after this, which was New Mind and Damn You to Hell, I'll Swallow You. New Mind being the opening track off of Children of God, and Damn You to Hell, I'll Swallow You is a very interesting sort of bonus track that was included on that album as well. And I think it works as a sort of closer. It's not as grand, but it has an even thicker contrast. It's basically 2 different songs sort of sewn together in a way that climaxes really fast. It gets really daunting and really scary. Not a lot of build, just a 1-to-1 contrast in a way that's really interesting. So I have to commend it for that. I think it's a very solid single and totally worth your time as a Swans neophyte, if you will. And I'll be covering a whole other studio album for this video. And I mentioned how Children of God got Swans a little more popular. Their huge, intense contrast got them pretty big as well. Their contrast with their earlier albums, I mean. So what would happen but they get an actual studio deal? Yes, they get signed to a real label that isn't themselves. I believe this is the only album released under Swans that isn't released on Burning World. The Burning World. Yes, we've reached 1989's The Burning World, which is a folk goth country album with a lot of acoustic guitar. And it's a pretty big departure from Children of God, in all honesty. It makes me wonder how a label exec picked up that album and was like, oh, now Swans are ready for the studio. Swans was still pretty scary at the time. I would argue they were really scary at the time, but I mean, what's done is done, and I wasn't even born yet. So we're going to start with the song, The River That Runs With Love Won't Run Dry. What a mouthful, man. It's a pretty, if straightforward, sort of gothic folk country sound. It's got that same repetition that every Swans album is known for, but it's a pretty jarring change so far. It's a bit psychedelic, and the lyrics are certainly strong. Michael Gira has always been good at that, but it feels very, very easy. Too easy, like there's something missing here. And on the song Let It Come Down, it does help a little bit. We get a bit more contrast and a bit more of a rocking edge to the whole thing. It's got these weeping strings in the background as well as a real sense of groove, which is something Swans has a really fun time with. It is just not explosive enough. The chorus is missing that sense of explosivity, even though it goes pretty heavy. It's just, you could tell in the studio they compressed this thing a bit too much. It is foreboding and apocalyptic, which makes it close to a great song, but the flaws of the production of the album are showing already. And this goes into the song Can't Find My Way Home, which is actually a cover. Yes, a cover of a band called Blind Faith, and it features the tabla, the Indian drum. I love that texture. I don't think it really belongs here that much. It feels kind of bizarre and not in a way that sounds alien. It just sounds like it shouldn't be here. Jarbo singing on this track does sound great, but the whole thing sounds a bit compressed and lacking in immediacy. It just feels like a random track. And up next is Mona Lisa Mother Earth, which is fast and eerie. It's a track that feels really weird. It's also another way that the tabla comes back for some reason, but there is a bit of a groove supported by the whole thing. Now, as someone who's been getting into a bit of goth rock recently, I could compare this to Fields of Nephilim. It has that sort of weird, hazy sound to it, but it's not nearly as heavy as that band, which that's not a particularly heavy band, so you're lacking something here. Both the chorus and the concept of the song feel weird and a bit half-baked, just sort of trying to compare a couple things that have no real, correlation. They don't have any correlation at all. Not even negative correlation or positive correlation. It's just so close to zero correlation that it's something I don't care to compare. And next is actually a pretty good one. She's a Universal Emptiness, which the chorus has not left me since hearing this album. Pretty hooky, good song here, just kind of wobbling back and forth, almost like an ocean. It's melancholic and eerie, kind of feels like a Leonard Cohen song, and it's very clearly about Michael Gira's mother. It's got electric guitar and a killer set of drum fills that makes it a really cool textural sort of template we have here, and it actually is one of the heaviest moments on the album as it gets super heavy texturally. It sort of grows and swells into this rolling sort of beast. A really solid track, an easy highlight off the album. And up next is the track Saved. There is a whole lot coming through. It is almost dream pop. It is so pretty, which is a crazy shock on this album. Seriously, I never expected something this good to come from Swans for a really long time. I don't think Michael Gira's vocals fit that well here, but it is sort of a half-baked song about religious introspection. And up next is another highlight off the album, I Remember Who You Are, which has Jarbo singing over a really minimalist guitar track. And it sounds really haunting and rather interesting as a whole orchestra fills in the background. Maybe not a whole orchestra, but a set of orchestral arrangements fills in and adds a really thick and haunting and weeping sound to the whole thing. It's almost mournful. I have to give this song kudos for being complex thematically. It actually has something that a lot of this album didn't have so far. And up next is Jane, Mary, Cry One Tear, which has a lot of resemblance to actually Heroin by Velvet Underground, the way its simple two-chord structure carries the entirety of the song. The repetition and really thick mix carry the entirety of the track here. Thematically, it appears to be a song about struggling against the devil, and it does have a bit of a weird ending. It feels like they didn't know what to do with it, where they kind of just repeat the chorus a bit more. It doesn't seem to do much for itself. Next is the song See No More, which is bouncy, a bit groovy, even a bit dissonant, and it's a song that actually declines. It gets a bit more somber and soft in the second half. It's about sinning and falling short of God, but conceptually it's just half-baked and not haunting enough. It's something that Swans is good at, and yet they're not doing it here. And this leads us into the closer, God Damn the Sun, a track that is entirely acoustic guitar and Michael Gira singing over the top. This is a song that is easily my favorite on this album. It's a total different one for Swans, but one that I really can't complain about at all. It's a really accessible one as well, so I hope you guys check this one out. But it is a total mournful song of pure hatred for everything that ever existed. It is a song about life stabbing you in the back every chance it gets to, and all you can do is drink your pain away and be mad about it. It's a song of utter defeat, which is something they're going to do on the next album, and the next album, and the next album, and the next album, and the next album. And it's really exemplified really well here. I got to commend the Swans for this one because it sounds so good. Michael Gira's vocal performance is as folky and ever so slightly flat as it tends to be, but it sounds so cool and haunting. His really bassy voice carries it in a really interesting direction. I think this is easily the best song on the album, even if it's just a folk song. It is just a folk song. It's more of a solo Michael Gira song anyway, but it's one that he's done in performances as late as, I don't know, I think 2012. So that just goes to show how good the song is. But that's the album, and even though a few songs made it through here, it feels like Swans didn't even like it back then. So I give this one a Wonder Bread. That's straight down the middle, which is unfortunate, but I mean, Swans themselves don't even like it now. Michael Gira's gone out and said this is their worst album. There was a bit where I was like, it can't be their worst, because I wasn't very big on Holy Money, but I would say it's their worst. And I'm going to end this video with a sort of prelude of next part. This is Anonymous Bodies in an Empty Room, which is a live album that basically covers a bunch of Burning World tracks, as well as a couple tracks that we'll be seeing on the next studio full-length album, White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, as well as a couple tracks that we don't ever really see again, which is pretty interesting. But this album is just as lo-fi as the other live albums so far, but there is one problem, and it's that none of the songs from Burning World sound good on it. On one of the sort of bonus tracks, Jarbo gives one of her worst vocal performances in the entire Swans discography. She's just flat like the whole time. The easy highlights are the songs from White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, because their explosiveness is carried with the low fidelity. These have all been very low fidelity so far, and Burning World is not given any favors from this. It's just too crunched up. There's nothing going for it. It is kind of lacking drama, but this version of Universal Emptiness is a bit of a highlight. It has a serious swelling sound to it. It also gets pretty loud, so I think that's a pretty solid track here. Overall, a bit of a disappointing live album. Not one that you definitely need to listen to, but someone had to. There you go. But yeah, I'm happy to say that's about it for today's video, or tonight, or wherever you are. I hope you guys enjoy. How are you guys liking this series so far? Are you guys liking Swans? If you do, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, or concerns, or thoughts, at all, down below in the comments section, if you would like, in the description box below, you will find my Instagram, my Twitter, and my Discord server where we talk about music and all sorts of things. And I guess that's about it. So I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.